Okay, hello and welcome. Um, Very quick note before we get started. I changed the name of this thing to Light and Fire. It had been Poems You Should Know. I've kind of made that the subtitle of it, and I'm calling it Light and Fire. That phrase is drawn from Shelley's famous Defense of Poetry. And the sentence in which it occurs goes like this: what were virtue, love, patriotism, friendship, etc.? What were the scenery of this beautiful universe which we inhabit? What were our consolations on this side of the grave? And what were our aspirations beyond it? If poetry did not ascend to bring light and fire from those eternal regions where the owl-winged faculty of calculation dare not ever soar. Like that sentence very much. It's very much aligned with how I tend to approach poetry, and what I see is its value. That this, that it's about the power of that part of us that can't be, that part of our experience, that part of us that can't be apprehended by words or rational concepts. That realm in which those things don't. Are really of no use to us, and just the whole kind of delightful irony that this most intensive and concentrated form of language is ultimately about what can't be said. So I like that very much. That passage isn't as famous as the conclusion of the Defense of Poetry, where he talks about poets as the hierophants of an unapprehended inspiration. Same kind of idea there. And the unacknowledged legislators of mankind, but it's pretty spiff all the same. So okay, that's that. And the poem that we're going to look at today is by Rachel Wetzsteon. I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly. It's spelled Wetzsteon. It's from her book Silver Roses. Rachel Wetzsteon, just very quickly, was, and I'm sorry to use the past tense, she's no longer living. She took her own life just at age 42. I don't know much about her biography, but one article that I saw quoted her mother saying that a long-term relationship she'd been in had just ended, and that she was distraught about that, and that may have been the proximate cause. So, I mean, really, terrible, as I say, just 42 years old. And first of all, of course, just in pure human terms for herself and her family and those who knew her. But for, lovers of poetry, there's now the tantalizing what might have been with her attached to her name now, which is a very sad state of affairs. So, pretty terrible. At any rate, she published 3 volumes of poetry in her short life, and one of criticism. I think that's about Auden. Yeah, it's called Influential Ghosts: A Study of Auden's Sources, which I'm sure is worth reading. And the poem we're going to look at today is from, as I say, Silver Roses, which appeared in 2010. It's called A Dream Vision, and I'll read through it now. A dream vision. 2 phantoms came to me one night. The first, a student of opera and hard knocks. Approaching in a gown spattered by bloodstains, she bore on a scarlet tray a gleaming golden pencil, said complain. The second, more flower girl than demented bride, strewed petals from bottomless pockets with one hand, held in the other a purple pillow with a silver pen upon it, whispered praise. Half awake in the pre-dawn, I tossed and turned, raged and burned, blearily staggered from bed to window, and wondered which fled ghost would sign her name to the phrases I was forming. Okay, so I think that's very nice, especially the end is very kind of chill. I kind of get chills with those last 2 lines. She wonders which fled ghost would sign her name to the phrases I was forming. So let's do a little bit of noticing here. We have a protagonist here. I have no idea whether this should be considered an autobiographical poem, if there's something like this she actually had a dream about this. It does seem to me that the protagonist of this poem is a poet, when she talks about the phrases that she's forming. But I think that the basic process she's describing about dreams and the materials of dreams and the kind of symbolic power of dreams and its their ability to kind of reveal to you or cause to sort of visit your mind and your your psyche and your spirit, deeper obsessions or perplexities or what have you, in your unconscious. I think that process occurs with anyone, and we all use language, and we all form phrases, and we all will bring those things, if the dream stays with us, and we want to make some kind of sense out of it, we will try to bring it into waking life, and they will take the form of phrases. And I think language is very much in the foreground of this poem. You have, I think, the protagonist here is describing this vivid dream that she's having, in which she's visited, so to speak, by two sharply contrasting and, it seems, competing phantoms, her word, competing for her what? Her allegiance, her soul, her imagination, her passion, what have you. So these two stanzas show us in very vivid imagery these two contrasting phantoms, and they are themselves composed of a series of contrasting attributes or binaries. I think it's fair to call them binaries, and of course language is constructed of binaries, and most of our conceptual life from Plato on, when Plato's responsible for the kind of dualistic way of looking at ideas and experience, form and substance being the I guess the primary one for him. The abstract and the concrete, etc. And then it goes through a whole host of others, and language is a system of distinctions. A thing means what it means because it doesn't mean something else. So I think language structures, rhetorical approaches, techniques, I think these are things that she's considering. And so we've got these contrasting binaries and or attributes that you're being invited to contrast and compare with each other. So first, you have the student of opera and hard knocks, is contrasted with, in the first stanza, is contrasted with the flower girl in the second stanza. Now, this student of opera and hard knocks in the second stanza is, I believe, the demented bride that's referred to in the second stanza is the student of is the figure in the first, the phantom in the first stanza. So you have this kind of bride and flower girl binary. There's the reference to the spattered blood, which seems to form a binary with the strewn flower petals. You have the scarlet tray that's being carried by the first phantom, that is a purple pillow being carried by the second one. You have the gleaming golden pencil in the first stanza, which becomes the silver pen in the second one. She describes the first figure in the first stanza as bearing this. She bore on a scarlet tray, so she bore it. The second figure merely holds. She held in the other a purple pillow. She just holds it. So bearing and holding, there's a distinction there. And finally, there's the contrast in what each phantom enjoins the dreaming person to do. In the one case, complain. In the other case, praise. Okay, so let's look at that first stanza. Two phantoms came to me one night. The first, a student of opera and hard knocks, approaching in a gown spattered by bloodstains. She bore on a scarlet tray a gleaming golden pencil, said complain. So the imagery here, the language, this cluster of attributes are extremely vivid, for one thing, and suggestive of violence, of burden, of physical and perhaps mental strain, of conflict. There's a kind of agonistic character and mood in this account of this what I'm going to call the phantom of complaint. I'll call the one the phantom of complaint and the other one the phantom of praise, just for convenience. And we notice, I just mentioned the specific binaries, but obviously the two stanzas are contrasting, as a whole too. So moving on to the second one, the second, more flower girl than demented bride, strewed petals from bottomless pockets with one hand, held in the other a purple pillow with a silver pen upon it, whispered praise. So we have more, the colors that are mentioned here are more muted in the second than in the first. There's a more serene and benign and kind of unruffled mood. There's nothing particularly fraught about it. And the contrasts, here are interesting because, among other things, because I think we can discern in them not just contrast in the abstract, but hierarchy, priority order. There seems to be a dominant term and a subordinate term in each case. The demented bride, who again seems to be the student of opera and hard knocks. That demented bride, that phrase occurs in the second stanza, but it seems to be talking about the figure of the first. It seems to me it does. Becomes a flower girl. So there's a priority order there. Obviously, in a wedding, the bride is the main event, and a flower girl is kind of a bit player. Very often a very cute and sweet bit player, but a bit player nonetheless. So the bride, the allusion to the bride would be the more dominant of the two terms. The spattered blood seems to associate in a contrasting way in the first stanza, with the strewn flowers of the second one, and may not be dominant, subordinate in that sense, but one is much more dramatic, much more vivid, much more makes much more of an impression, I think, than the strewn flowers. The scarlet tray becomes a purple pillow. Again, scarlet is a more dramatic, a bolder color than purple. And the gleaming golden pencil becomes a silver pen. So the gleaming gold becomes silver, and it's easy to see a priority order between silver and gold. And of course, in the context of precious metals, gold is more valuable than silver. So by means of all this, the phantom of praise seems, in a way, subordinate to this more dominant phantom of complaint. But there is this one very interesting kind of, faint pulse of counterpoint here that may cut against the overall trend, thinking about that priority order or that hierarchy, as we move from the phantom of complaint to the phantom of praise. The pencil becomes a pen. I may be, but I don't think I am, stressing the language too much by looking at that distinction as kind of an exception to the overall trend. We are being invited to compare these two, each term of these binaries. I mean, the whole point of that, I think, is to make you compare them. And of course, the principal distinction between a pencil and a pen is that a pencil is known for making inscriptions and markings that are impermanent, and the pen for making permanent, or at any rate more lasting, inscriptions. So there is this kind of intriguing suggestion here, again, if I'm not pressing too hard on the language, that praise, although less dramatic than complaint, yet may represent a human dimension that's more deep-running and enduring than that represented by complaint, and therefore ultimately may be the stronger of the two. And it's kind of this under-the-surface sort of suggestion or pulse that I think is really very interesting in this poem. So that in the end, this kind of stark binary that the poem is setting up this may be a way of, in some sense, rejecting it, at least in the stark terms that it's portrayed, or undermining it in some way, um, and suggesting that maybe it's a little more complicated than that. So then we move to the third stanza, where we find where the protagonist comes into focus, not just what's in her mind, but herself. Half awake in the pre-dawn, I tossed and turned, raged and burned, blearily staggered from bed to window, and wondered which fled ghost would sign her name to the phrases I was forming. So I wonder when she says, I wonder which fled ghost would sign the name to the phrases I was forming. When I first read the poem, I almost took that as tongue in cheek, because the phantom of complaint is so much more dominant in this than the phantom of praise, and is rendered in such more vivid, more bolder, more sinewy kind of terms than is the phantom of praise, that I almost thought that was kind of a almost a sarcastic kind of statement. But I'm not so sure. I think that little sense that praise may have ultimately more staying power, sort of the tortoise in the race with the hare, is kind of intriguing, and I think maybe may have something to do with what's going on here. And especially it seemed to me that the phantom of complaint was dominating with her, and probably would be signing its name to the phrases that she was forming, because of the strain that she seems to be under as she's in this half awake state she's in. And again, these in between states, we talked about that with the Delmore Schwartz poem. These in between states are interesting, because they can kind of defamiliarize your experience, your world, your environment for you in a way that that yields insight in some way, and sort of liberates you from the kind of constraints that you are under, just by the way that you, in looking at in your world and experiencing it, because of your so much, all that we take for granted every day of our lives. But she's tossing and turning, she's half awake, she rages and burns, and she blearily staggers to the window and wonders which fled ghost would sign her name to the phrases I was forming. So and of course, if we want to make sense, as I think I said, of dreams we have, we want to make them, if we find there's something valuable in them, we have to bring them into our verbal and conceptual structures that we use in our waking life, and try to make sense of them. And that's what she's trying to do here. I think as a poet, but as I say, that's a common condition for any person. And then the one, I should say more about this, the way that the poem seems to be standing up this kind of allegory, maybe, about the intimate and very deeply mysterious relationship that language bears to consciousness, and even to the unconscious. There may be a suggestion here. We're talking about a dream, and so I assume the unconscious, the subconscious, is what you're tapping into when you're dreaming. There may be a suggestion here that even the wild and woolly environs of our unconscious are, to a great extent, composed of verbal structures, of conceptual and symbolic elements that are properly seen as linguistic. Ultimately, I don't think it's an accident, frankly, that she has alighted on praise and blame here as the two contrasting poles, the two injunctions that these two phantoms are expressing. complaint, and I think I said praise and blame, but complaint. The terms in the poem are complain and praise. That's very close to praise and blame, and just to sort of reinforce the primacy of language and its and our relationship to it. That's very close to the phrase praise and blame, which is the definition of one of the fundamental types of rhetoric, namely epideictic rhetoric, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, which is the rhetoric of praise or blame. It's often used in ceremonial contexts, at least the praise part of it is. And it's one of the, I think, three most fundamental. The others, just parenthetically, are deliberative rhetoric, which is an argument that is proposing some course of action to take to solve a problem or what have you. So deliberative rhetoric is concerned with the future. And then there's forensic rhetoric, which is concerned with the past. What happened, what is what really should we think about something about the past, something that happened in the past, some aspect of our history, whatever it may be. And then there's epideictic rhetoric. I think that she's using these terms. I think deliberately to invoke the rhetorical structures that we inhabit and by which we make sense of the world, and into which the materials of a dream are going to be imported and will be made to body forth in our waking life. So I think, again, this underlines the penetration of these concepts, these sort of habits of mind, or just our makeup as speaking humans, and the poet's attempt, which is a more acute case, but as I say, I think every person has this experience, and every person will be a poet in that at least limited sense. And so that's let go signing the phrase I was forming. And there's this kind of suggestion that the phrases she's forming, when she says she's already forming them, that almost that the same phrases could end up bearing the signature of the phantom of complaint or of praise, either one. And it has to do with something beyond the words themselves that makes them, gives them their character. Anyway, very interesting, very nice poem. And I think I will leave it there, and I'll just read it one more time. A dream vision. Two phantoms came to me one night. The first, a student of opera and hard knocks, approaching in a gown spattered by bloodstains. She bore on a scarlet tray a gleaming golden pencil, said complain. The second, more flower girl than demented bride, strewed petals from bottomless pockets with one hand, held in the other a purple pillow with a silver pen upon it, whispered praise. Half awake in the pre-dawn, I tossed and turned, raged and burned, blearily staggered from bed to window, and wondered which fled ghost would sign her name to the phrases I was forming. Okay, and as I always say, I don't think I said at the beginning, if you like the poem, and this or any poem, really consider saying it out loud. Make it not just an experience for your imagination and your intellect, but make it a physical experience. Let it structure your breathing for the time that you're saying it. I just really, any literature, you could take a passage of any literature in a novel or whatever that's really well wrought and do the same, I think. But with a poem, it just seems to have a special power for me to make it that. I really like the idea of it being a physical experience, as well as an imaginative and an intellectual one. Okay, I guess I will leave it there. Thank you. See you next time.